Meghan is hardly innocent. She's down in the dirt with me, whether she likes it or not.
Before sunrise, while the corridors of Britain's royal residences remained silent, a command carrying the authority of the crown moved from palace to palace. King Charles had ordered every official portrait of Meghan removed before morning. Frames were lifted from walls, inventories were rewritten, and staff were warned not to discuss what they had witnessed. By breakfast, an entire chapter of royal history appeared to have vanished, and the king had not offered a single public explanation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had approved the order shortly after midnight. The written directive, a formal instruction issued under the monarch's authority, named Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Clarence House, St. James's Palace, and every other residence displaying Meghan's image. It covered official portraits, framed photographs, commemorative arrangements, and family displays seen by visiting guests. Nothing had been overlooked. Nothing had been left to chance. Senior household officers moved quickly. They contacted security teams, collection staff, and trusted employees who understood that silence was part of the assignment. At Windsor, 2 workers entered a private reception room where Meghan and Harry's photograph stood beside images of other royal couples. One steadied the frame, the other lifted it from its hook. Neither spoke as the pale outline beneath it appeared. Charles remained alone in his study as the operation began. He read the final page again, held the pen above the signature line, and hesitated. The king then signed, placed the pen down, and looked toward a family photograph on his desk. He showed no anger, yet his stillness revealed the truth. This was not a decorative decision. It was a personal wound being turned into royal policy. Hours later, Meghan opened a private message from a trusted palace contact in California. The documented account contained one blunt sentence. Every official image of her had been removed overnight. She read it twice. Her expression hardened, then changed into something quieter. Harry followed when she left the breakfast table and demanded to know whether the message could be wrong. She told him it was already done. The empty spaces made the order more severe. Palace staff had not been told to replace the portraits. Bare walls remained where Meghan's face had once appeared, turning absence into a statement about status, belonging, and royal memory. The Duchess understood that immediately, and Harry understood it even more painfully. Charles had chosen the timing himself. No committee had selected the night. The monarch approved the residences, demanded completion before dawn, and limited knowledge of the operation to a tiny circle. William received a sealed copy shortly before the removals began. The prince opened it, scanned the names, and stopped. Harry's individual portraits were untouched. Meghan alone had been identified. William read the distinction again, and the question became impossible to avoid. What had she done that made the king separate her image from his son's? The empty frames revealed the order, but the people behind them were about to expose why it cut far deeper than anyone outside the family understood. The removal of Meghan's portraits was not simply a battle between a monarch and a duchess. It placed a father against his younger son, forced William to confront the damage inside his family, and left Catherine watching another royal fracture become permanent. Each person stood to lose something different. Charles risked Harry, Meghan risked her place in history, and the Duke of Sussex faced the possibility that defending his wife could sever his last emotional connection to home. Charles felt the weight of every missing frame. To him, those portraits held more than Meghan's years as a working royal. A role meaning she carried out duties on behalf of the crown. They preserved the period when Harry still stood beside his father at ceremonies and family gatherings. Removing her image meant cutting into memories of his son, his grandchildren, and the hope that reconciliation might become possible. Meghan understood the symbolism immediately. Her photographs proved that she had been welcomed into the royal institution publicly. Their disappearance threatened her place in that history. She had entered the family on ceremonial terms, faced pressure, and now feared the palace was trying to rewrite the record once relationships had broken down. Harry read the order again and noticed the distinction. His portraits remained. Hers did not. Instead of feeling protected, he felt exposed. He asked Meghan whether the palace was trying to split them apart by preserving the prince while rejecting the woman he had chosen. She answered that the message was deliberate, and that Charles expected him to understand what it meant. William carried that conclusion in silence. At Kensington Palace, the prince folded the directive, while Catherine watched him struggle for words. He understood why the monarchy wanted control over imagery, but he knew Harry would see the removal as an attack on his marriage. Catherine then remembered a private exchange months earlier, when Meghan had warned that the palace could not control how her royal identity would be presented forever. Camilla had already tried to slow the decision. During an evening conversation, the Queen warned Charles that removing every portrait overnight would look punitive. She urged him to reduce the displays gradually. He refused. The King said gradual measures had failed, revealing that something serious had pushed him beyond compromise. Harry demanded an explanation. A palace contact offered one clue through a private message. The order was tied to a royal commemoration held 3 weeks earlier, where Meghan's name had appeared in a place Charles considered unforgivable. To understand why the King turned family tension into an overnight act of erasure, the story must return to the ceremony that became the point of no return. 3 weeks before the portraits disappeared, members of the royal household gathered for a private commemoration intended to protect the memory of the late Queen. There were no cameras, no crowds, and no expectation of controversy. Yet before the ceremony ended, Charles discovered that Meghan had authorized her name and royal association to appear in a presentation connected to the occasion. The King did not raise his voice. He simply closed the commemorative booklet, and from that moment, reconciliation began collapsing behind palace doors. Charles entered the Windsor gathering expecting restraint, not conflict. The private commemoration, a closed event honoring Queen Elizabeth's charitable legacy, had brought Camilla, William, Catherine, Anne, and courtiers together around a booklet recording causes linked to the late monarch. Every page carried weight, because the event was meant to protect her memory from politics, publicity, and commercial use. Meghan's name appeared near the end. A page promoted an American media project under her royal title and claimed inspiration from values associated with the late Queen. The wording created the impression of family approval. Charles read the heading twice, looked at the communications secretary, and asked who had authorized it. Silence followed. The King closed the booklet and pushed it across the table. Catherine saw the hurt beneath his control. She understood that Charles believed a private remembrance had been used to strengthen an outside brand. The princess asked whether the ceremony should continue. He answered yes, but his voice had changed. Camilla noticed it too, and she remained close as the monarch forced the gathering forward. Harry defended Meghan by telephone after an aide contacted him. He insisted she had meant no disrespect and argued that her work reflected values she associated with his grandmother. Charles heard the explanation later and rejected it. Intention, he said, did not excuse using a family memorial without permission. The danger deepened when an internal review uncovered a documented email from Meghan's representative. The message showed that the wording had been requested personally and that an attempt to remove the title had been resisted. One sentence declared that the royal connection was essential to the project's credibility. Charles read it alone, underlined it once, and made his decision. The portraits were now part of the dispute. The King ordered advisors to catalog every official location displaying Meghan's image, because the palace was lending legitimacy through titles, photographs, and ceremonial memory while she operated independently. Charles offered one final chance. He requested a private conversation with Meghan, without advisors, lawyers, or communications staff. Her answer would decide whether the portraits remained or vanished. The ceremony created the wound, but that conversation would turn disappointment into a decision neither of them could reverse. When Charles finally spoke to Meghan, there were no courtiers to soften his language, and no public audience to influence her response. The conversation began quietly, almost formally, but beneath every measured sentence lay years of accusation, disappointment, and unresolved pain. The King demanded that she stop presenting royal identity as something she could control independently. Meghan refused to accept that the palace alone owned her history. What followed was not a negotiation. It was a final struggle over who had the right to define her. Charles arranged the call from a small room at Clarence House. The royal residence, which served as his London home and working base, had been stripped of every unnecessary presence. One aide waited outside the closed door. Meghan joined from California without Harry beside her, honoring the monarch's demand for a direct conversation without lawyers, advisors, or representatives. Charles stated the issue without ceremony. The commemorative booklet had crossed a boundary. The crown, meaning the authority and public identity of the monarchy, could not allow royal titles, family memories, or palace imagery to suggest support for an independent commercial project. His voice stayed calm, but he offered no soft language and no promise of compromise. Meghan rejected the accusation immediately. Her marriage, service, and years inside the institution had become part of who she was. She told Charles that the palace could not welcome her before the world, expose her to relentless scrutiny, and then expect her to behave as if that life had never happened. He listened without interrupting, yet his silence hardened with every sentence. Charles leaned closer and finally said, "You cannot use the crown while rejecting its authority." Meghan held his gaze. She answered that the institution could remove her from its rooms, but it could never remove what she had lived through. The king's jaw tightened. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Charles then offered one final condition. Meghan could sign a written commitment limiting her use of royal styling in future promotions and remove the disputed material. In return, he would allow selected portraits to remain in private family areas, though not in ceremonial rooms used to represent the monarchy publicly. Meghan refused. She said the pledge would give the palace permanent control over her voice. Charles closed the folder before him and told her that the answer had clarified everything. The call ended without farewell. Minutes later, Charles summoned William to Clarence's house. The prince arrived to find his father alone, the folder sealed, and the decision already forming. Meghan had defended her right to own her story. Now Charles was ready to prove that the walls, symbols, and official memory of the monarchy remained under his control. The most decisive royal commands are rarely delivered before cheering crowds. They are created in quiet rooms, written in careful language, and handed to people who understand that a signature can change family history. When William entered Clarence's house, he found his father beside a sealed folder containing the portrait directive. Charles did not ask whether the order was kind. He asked whether the future king would support it. In that moment, William realized he was not being consulted. He was being tested. Charles held the authority to act without public debate. As sovereign and head of the royal household, the organization that manages the monarch's official duties, staff, and residences, he controlled how the family appeared inside royal palaces. Advisors had confirmed that Parliament did not need to approve changes to private displays. The danger was never legal. The danger was emotional, because removing Meghan's image would turn a family dispute into an official royal judgment. William opened the folder slowly. Inside were lists of portraits, exact locations, responsible collection officers, and strict deadlines. Separate instructions would travel to each residence so that no staff member outside the senior circle could understand the full scale of the operation. The prince recognized the method immediately. This had been designed for speed, silence, and absolute control. William challenged the timing. He warned that removing every portrait overnight would humiliate Harry and deepen the division between the brothers. Charles answered that delay had allowed the same conflict to return repeatedly. The king insisted that endless negotiation was weakening the institution and making every symbol of royal belonging vulnerable to dispute. Charles pushed the folder toward his son. He asked whether royal identity could exist without royal responsibility. William hesitated, then answered that it could not. The future king felt no relief after speaking. His words had strengthened an order Harry would remember as betrayal. William stopped when he found Catherine's name. One instruction gave her responsibility for approving replacement arrangements in ceremonial rooms, formal spaces used to represent the monarchy before guests and officials. The prince objected immediately. He refused to let his wife appear to benefit from Meghan's removal. Charles studied him, then removed her name from the plan. Charles protected one boundary of his own. Harry's solo portraits would remain untouched, because the monarch wanted to separate his son's birthright from Meghan's independent royal identity. William warned that Harry would see the distinction as an attempt to divide his marriage from his family. William noticed one final photograph before leaving. It showed Charles walking beside Meghan on her wedding day. The king faltered and ordered that the frame be brought directly to him. The machinery of the palace was now moving, but as the portraits came down, the consequences escaped the sealed folder and entered the lives of everyone the order was meant to control. By dawn, the operation was complete. Meghan's face had disappeared from reception rooms, galleries, staircases, and private corridors across the royal estate. But the removal did not produce the clean silence Charles expected. It triggered panic among staff, fury in California, and a confrontation between two brothers who had already lost years to suspicion. As the final frame entered locked storage, Harry made a decision of his own. If the palace could erase his wife, he could reject the palace in return. Staff at Buckingham Palace removed a formal photograph from a corridor used during diplomatic receptions, where visiting officials were received on behalf of the monarch. At Windsor, another team took down a family image from a room occasionally open to foreign dignitaries. Every frame was wrapped, recorded in the royal collection, the official archive preserving historic objects owned for the crown, and transferred into secure storage rather than destroyed. One longtime courtier stopped before an empty space. He remembered helping install the photograph after the royal wedding, when the family had still spoken of unity and renewal. The employee touched the unused hook before a supervisor ordered the corridor cleared. He stepped away, but the meaning stayed with him. This no longer felt like redecoration. It felt like the dismantling of a relationship. Meghan demanded proof from California. When a trusted contact sent an image of a blank section of wall, she stared without speaking. Anger had carried her through the first message, but the empty space broke through that defense. The Duchess realized the order had reached beyond ceremonial portraits and into photographs connected to her wedding, early service, and first hopes of belonging. Harry called William immediately. He demanded to know whether his brother had supported the removals. The prince admitted he had known before dawn, though he insisted he had argued against making the action humiliating. Harry answered that silence and participation had become impossible to separate. William tried to explain the pressure surrounding the decision, but the Duke ended the call before he could finish. Harry then instructed his team to prepare a public statement accusing the palace of manipulating family history. Meghan urged caution, warning that an angry response would let Charles portray them as reckless. He refused to remain silent. To him, the order had not targeted decoration, it had targeted their marriage. Charles faced one portrait alone. The wedding photograph delivered to Clarence House never entered storage. The king unwrapped it, studied the image of himself beside Meghan before the ceremony, and placed it face down inside a private cabinet. Moments before Harry's statement was released, a direct message arrived from his father. No aide had sent it. Charles requested one private conversation before either side made the separation public and permanent. The empty walls had produced anger, but that message created one final space where father and son could speak without titles, advisors, or palace protection. For 1 hour, the monarchy disappeared from the conversation. There was no sovereign, no duke, no official representative, and no carefully prepared statement. There was only Charles speaking to the son he feared losing, and Harry defending the woman he believed the family had never accepted. Neither man apologized at first. Neither surrendered. Yet as old grievances gave way to raw honesty, the argument changed. The portraits remained removed, but the meaning of the decision was forced into the open at last. Harry agreed to speak under one condition. No aides would take notes, and no official summary would be written afterward. Charles accepted immediately. The two men connected late in the British evening, each alone, while Meghan and Camilla remained outside their separate rooms. For once, palace protocol, the formal system controlling royal conduct and communication, would not protect either man from the truth. Harry demanded the real reason. He asked whether one disputed booklet could truly justify removing every portrait of his wife. Charles answered that the ceremony had only been the final trigger. Years of conflict had turned every title, photograph, and family memory into another battlefield. The king said the palace could no longer display unity when none existed behind closed doors. Harry refused to accept that explanation. He said the order proved Meghan had never been treated as permanent family. His father had preserved the prince while rejecting the wife, creating a false division between birth and marriage. The Duke argued that his life could not be divided so neatly, because choosing her had become part of choosing himself. Charles fell silent before answering. He admitted that removing Harry's portraits had felt like declaring his son lost forever. The monarch's voice weakened when he revealed, through that private recorded call, that the wedding photograph had been brought directly to him. He had not sent it into storage. Harry heard the pain beneath the decision for the first time. Harry still refused to support the removals, but he changed the public statement. It would condemn the order without accusing Charles of destroying history. The revised wording would acknowledge that the portraits remained preserved in the royal collection, the official archive that protects historic royal objects. Meghan listened when Harry described the call. She agreed to remove the late Queen's commemorative reference from the American project, not as surrender, but to protect the memorial from further conflict. She would not sign the broader pledge. Charles accepted the change but did not restore the portraits. The compromise prevented total destruction. Yet the empty walls were about to become public. The private call had saved one fragile bridge, but neither Charles nor Meghan could control the judgment waiting beyond the palace gates. The world did not first learn of the order through a palace announcement. It learned through a photograph. A single image of an empty space inside Buckingham Palace appeared online, showing two hooks, a lighter patch of wallpaper, and no explanation. Within minutes, the missing portrait became more powerful than the image that had once occupied the wall. Supporters saw cruelty. Traditionalists saw discipline. Outside the palace gates, strangers argued over whether Meghan had been erased or finally separated from the crown. Royal observers moved quickly. A staff photograph taken during preparations for a diplomatic reception had accidentally revealed the change. The reception, a formal event where the monarch welcomes foreign representatives, was supposed to project stability. Instead, viewers compared the new image with older photographs and identified the missing portrait before the palace could control the story. Buckingham Palace responded with a brief written statement. Officials said royal displays had been revised under Charles's direction to reflect the monarchy's current working structure, meaning the smaller group carrying out official duties for the crown. The wording never mentioned Meghan. That silence made the statement feel colder, and speculation spread faster. Harry watched the coverage from California. Broadcasters placed the old and new images side by side, while one commentator called the removal a symbolic divorce between Meghan and the institution. The Duke clenched his hand. She switched off the television and reminded him that they had chosen not to release the harsher statement. He agreed, but the humiliation remained. Charles faced condemnation of his own. At Clarence House, the king opened a folder filled with headlines and stopped at one front page showing the empty wall beneath the words, "Erased by order of the king." He asked whether the article explained that the portraits had been preserved. His secretary answered that few outlets considered the distinction important. The monarch closed the folder without replying. Crowds gathered by afternoon. Near the Buckingham Palace railings, one woman held a printed wedding photograph of Harry and Meghan. Another carried a sign defending Charles's right to protect the monarchy. Cameras captured them speaking calmly across the barrier, turning two strangers into a symbol of national division. William refused to exploit the moment. When journalists asked whether Catherine had gained from Meghan's removal, the prince cancelled a proposed background briefing and ordered his office to remain silent. He would not let his wife become the replacement face of a family conflict. Palace officials then clarified the final policy internally. Meghan's portraits would remain preserved in the royal collection, the official archive protecting historic royal objects, but they would not return to ceremonial display while she remained outside royal service. One decision remained. Charles still had the wedding portrait hidden in his cabinet, and what he did with it would reveal whether the order had been driven by hatred or by a painful boundary between family memory and royal authority. When the public outrage faded and the palace corridors returned to silence, Charles opened the cabinet containing the one portrait he had refused to send into storage. It showed a day when Meghan had not yet become an opponent, Harry had not yet become distant, and the royal family still believed unity could survive every pressure placed upon it. The king held the frame alone. His next decision would reveal the final truth. This order was not about pretending the past had never happened. Charles carried the wedding photograph to his desk several nights after the removals. It showed him accompanying Meghan before her marriage to Harry, long before bitterness had transformed every shared memory into evidence in a family conflict. The monarch placed the frame upright and studied it in silence, remembering a moment when hope had seemed stronger than division. The distinction had finally become clear. Charles had removed Meghan from official palace presentation, not from the historical archive. The archive, the protected collection preserving objects and records linked to the monarchy, still held every portrait under careful cataloging. The king had drawn a severe boundary between public representation and private history. He had not ordered her image destroyed. Charles accepted the cost of that boundary. He knew the decision had wounded Harry and confirmed Meghan's belief that she would never be accepted on her own terms. The monarch did not pretend the order had healed anything. It had only ended the contradiction of displaying unity on palace walls while the family remained divided behind closed doors. Meghan received confirmation in California that the photographs had been preserved. She did not call it victory, but the news removed her fear that her royal years had been erased completely. The Duchess approved revised project materials without the disputed memorial reference, and chose to move forward without asking for restoration inside the palaces. Harry made a choice of his own. He refused to remove photographs of Charles from his home, even while anger remained. The private conversation had reminded the Duke that a father still existed beneath the crown. Their relationship was damaged and limited, but neither man was now forcing it toward total destruction. Charles carried the wedding portrait into a private family room at Clarence House. He did not return it to a ceremonial corridor, yet he refused to hide it inside the cabinet again. Camilla entered later, noticed the frame, and said nothing. The Queen Consort understood that his choice required no explanation. The empty palace spaces remained, but their meaning was settled. Meghan's absence marked the end of her place within the monarchy's active public structure, not the destruction of her history. She retained her story beyond the crown. Harry retained a fragile bridge to his father. Charles accepted that protecting the institution sometimes meant publicly removing what he could never emotionally discard. And so the order ended exactly where it began, with a portrait, a silent room, and a king who discovered that authority could clear every royal wall overnight, but could never command the heart to forget. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.